Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. We're hanging out with David Porter today. He's a Pedro Sauer Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I screw this up every time, the entrance and everything. He's also known as the Brabo guy. I'm sure we'll get into that kind of stuff and talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and what it means to him and everything. So, hey, man, David, thanks for hanging out with us. Appreciate it very much.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It's going to be a fun time to chat with you guys about my musings on the sport of South American ground karate.
It's a great way to put it. That's awesome. I was reading, when you were asked by Pedro when you were a purple belt about doing the Brabo more, like, because you showed it, he really liked it and was like, hey, is this part of something you do all the time? And when you say it like that, like when you talk about like just that part of the South American thing, it's funny because I'm like, wow, yeah, that Brabo choke is like super famous now. But what made you like it so much?
It's weird, I originally started training in New York in the early 2000s, and I made my way from Matt Serra BJJ gyms to Henzo's in New York City, and I just remember like along the way I would bump into people that were doing a lot of no-gi at the time. And the Darce was super popular, even though it wasn't as mainstream. But in that region, if Joe D'Arcy, he came through Henzo's. And so like that imprint was left in the area. And so when I picked it up, it was in no-gi as a white belt. And it just sat in the back of my mind and I never really used it. And then years later, after I was in the Marine Corps, after I got out and I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go for jiu-jitsu, I was a purple belt who was like really physical, but I didn't have the technical prowess.
Okay.
So anybody I talked to said that one of the best technical instructors in the world is Pedro Sauer, a Rickson black belt. So I said, all right, man, I'll check him out. And I was hooked immediately, went to Pedro's. And for the first 5 to 6 months, my name was Amigo. And, he didn't know my name. And, he had 400 students. So it was like hard to like stand out in the crowd, even as a purple belt.
Yeah.
You got like 12 black belts in the lineup just in class as students. So for me to be anybody with a name was hard. But I remember it was actually the anniversary of this instance I'm going to talk about happened recently. It was May 1st, 2013. I'm in a class. A gentleman by the name of Mark Kukro, who's an instructor out of North Carolina. He was up visiting and he asked anybody in the class if they had any questions. And this blue belt at the time, by the name of Cameron Kingsbury, he said, yeah, so I'm having trouble getting out of the Darce. And Mark goes, well, I'm not really well versed in it, but if anybody else knows it, by all means. And I raised my hand. I'm like, I kind of have a decent one, I guess, but not compared to this school. And so I do it. And Cameron couldn't get out. And then Mark couldn't get out. And then Pedro wanted to feel it. He couldn't get out. Next thing you know, they're like, we need to work this move. Hey, man, you're pretty good at this move. And then I was like, am I? All right, maybe I'll start doing it more. So it's funny how from May 1st, 2013 to forward, it had been something like I had known of. I had thought it was just like, how do you feel about your armbar? Your armbar, you're probably like, yeah, I know the armbar, but I don't think I'm great at it.
Sure,
and that's how I was with it. So even when I deployed to Afghanistan and my second deployment, I had one of the early jiu-jitsu magazines that had Glover on the cover, and it was like single digits back then, like episode or issue 6 or 7, and he was showing like Darce chokes from deep half, bailing the deep half to go for it, and I thought it was cool, but I didn't think anything much of it. So when I got back, and then Pedro said that, I did a deep dive. Got Glover's Darcepedia, started watching everybody who did the move, saw how certain people were known for it, but where they would lose it. Like when I watched the Ryan Hall, Jeff Glover shootout, and they were both doing it to each other and escaping. I was like, well, why are they escaping? And I just became very, very analytical about it. And so over time, because of Pedro being like, hey, you're pretty good at this, he got in my head. And then I was like, I gotta be better than what he thinks I am. And after like, I would say 2 years of meticulous study, and then obviously getting to train with Glover, train with Ryan Hall, and have these guys kick my butt and show me how they're doing it and ask them the questions, it finally started getting traction. And I want to say it was like just prior to me getting my brown belt, I was hitting it ridiculously often, to the point where I go to a US Grappling event, a local show in North Carolina, Virginia, the Mid-Atlantic, and I did 5 in a row in my tournament, just like back to back to back, almost identical setups.
Wow.
And I had this guy, Matt Moretz, in the crowd scream out, "Do something else." It's like, nah, man, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So
right, exactly. Yeah.
So I really gravitated towards it. Yeah, I really gravitated towards it. And during my studies, I found that the Darce, as we know it, came from the Brabo, which is, you know, the gi version, where you take the lapel, feed it across the back, left side lapel to right side shoulder, you make the bar, and then you pull the arm across. And so the hand on the bar is one part of the blood choke, and then their shoulder is the other, just like, you know, when you're thinking about certain types of triangles. So in my troubleshooting of the move, I tried to figure out a way to go from the old school style and bridge the gap to what people were, you know, locally doing as the Darce, and figure out where those missing ingredients were. And I kind of came up with my own recipe. And now when I teach it, it's like, I can teach it to people that don't have long arms. I can teach it to people that are even struggling with holding rear naked chokes, and yet they can do this move easy. And it just came down to, you know, troubleshooting the grips and how you want to get the pressure and where you want their head. And do you want to finish locking side down or locking side up? And man, it was a journey of exploration that really just made me better at overall jiu-jitsu. But, you know, now I had Glover come to my my old academy in Bellingham, Washington, which I owned with Jeff Shaw, that he still runs today. And we had Glover come out for our first seminar about 2 years ago now. And, you know, Glover showed awesome deep half stuff. And at the end, he was asking questions, or sorry, he was taking questions, and he was like, "Ask me anything except a Darce question." And then he looks at me, and it was so like flattering, because he's the guy, you know.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be here without him setting the path. And now I'm looking at the Rotolo twins and what they're doing with it. And obviously, like, they're still very young, they have a long way to go, but it's going to be incredible 10 years from now to think about how much the move has changed. But yeah, that's the long of it. That's the long version.
Oh, the cool part about that too is, like, you've taken, you know, you've been in jiu-jitsu for a very long time. It's finding the technical. It's not just about doing the move, so to speak. Like, you begin to evolve into finding the small little technical thing. And I'm not trying to discount it to say small, but it's that small move, or that ability to change it slightly to where it works for a lot of people, for a broad amount of people. And, you know, there are people that say, and Chad and I talk about this all the time, hey, you know, that may not be able to be worked in your game, or you're a bigger guy, so you can't do certain things, and you're a smaller guy and you can't do, you know, you do certain things this way and whatnot. But it sounds like you broke it down. Like, you really invested, you know, the thought process of going, hey, let me do this, tweak this, you know, to get that arm under. I'm curious, with the Darce itself, did wrestling help, like, that mind on how to go because of side control when they're up and diving that arm underneath their hand or underneath their head with that S grip? The reason go ahead.
No, please.
The reason I asked that, because there's actually there's a pinning move that does that, and it's helped me, like in Darce, if I'm at side control, I lock the leg with my let's go for my good side and not my dumb side. If I'm on the right side, I'll lock the leg with my leg. I'll push their leg around, and then I'll dive under and reach and use this shoulder into their floater rib and pull, and then rotate around to rotate that. Now there's a pinning move. It's kind of like a cradle, like that, in wrestling. So when I've seen you do it, obviously, and I was just curious. I'm like, did it help? It's the first thing that came back to me. I was like, man, I did that when I was wrestling, but not choking nobody out.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because I was always like one step behind in wrestling in terms of age and skill to where I was. Okay. So wrestling has such an impact on my grappling. And what's funny is I had so many matches where I ended up pulling guard, and people don't really get a chance to see my wrestling, because it's just the nature of the sport right now, where you very rarely find that person that starts the match with their 15-degree neck tilt, and you're like, oh, cool, we're wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
and yet you have so many people that are like, slap, bump, sit to my butt. And it's like, all right, well, you know, my stance is, it's halfway between like what Rafa Mendes wants to do and what a wrestler wants to do. And it's like, man, I want to be ready to pull the guard, but I also want to stop you from pulling the guard and have that knee up already. I want to have that low hand low to the ground so I can hit my ankle pick or come up on the single. And yeah, the wrestling is such a huge impact, but you wouldn't know it unless you know. And so when I see Khabib come out to a fight and he says he has a shirt that says, if jiu-jitsu were or if sambo were easy, they'd call it jiu-jitsu. You have to realize that it's because sambo has so much wrestling in it and the takedowns are phenomenal, but wrestlers just have a different mental state in terms of the grapple. Anyway, we could talk about that too. Like just
sure. No, I understand what you mean. Yeah. Like we have, and Chad, you can contest to this. I mean, you've had Chad runs, he's our resident black belt there at East Coast and teaching us every single day of the week. And he's, experienced a ton of wrestlers that have come in and, seen stuff like that. And, it's just different. It's just, there's a different mindset with wrestlers. Good base. I mean, it helped me like from a base standpoint to, not be maybe swept or tipped over so much. But other than that, I still suck.
I'll say it because I said it just the other day and it made a bunch of people laugh. It was like, man, I did a move and everyone's looking at me like cross-eyed and I go, hey guys, after 18 years, I was an overnight success.
Exactly.
You still competing now?
I haven't competed in 2 years. I suffered a fairly decent injury to my knee rock climbing.
Oh man, sorry to hear that.
No, it's all right. I tried a few tournaments and shows after the injury. Like I had a match with Will Martinez for Fight to Win Pro, a super fight. That was a really fun match. He won via foot sweep because the rest of the match was relatively boring because I just played it safe and I had to. Like it sucked. He's a killer. And then I had a tournament and I actually won every match of the tournament save one where my knee then locked and went backwards a little bit. So, but it couldn't have happened to a better person. Like when it happened, like my friend Josh Murdoch, and they're right now training with the Daisy Fresh dudes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Josh and CJ are down there training with those guys. But, I had I've had matches with both brothers before and I've had, good success, but I was rolling with Josh in the match where my knee locked and, he just stopped immediately and he's like, you okay? I was like, yeah, I think we're done here. And he was like, oh man, I hope you feel better. And so it's not like some dude who was going to steal my lunch money when he smelled blood in the water.
Sure. Right.
But yeah, I haven't competed since. And I think I would only ever come back to compete if it were like something that would be like a dream matchup, like a chance to grapple JT or,
nice.
Sure. Yeah.
Because at 170, I've had the opportunity of grappling Gordon Ryan twice at 170. Taza. I'm trying to think of like really good dudes. I had the match that I beat Diego Bispo at 170. I've just been very, very fortunate with like really good competition at that weight class. So
sure,
if I were to come back and compete, it would have to be at somebody who's like, tier 1, god tier grappler at 170 to make it like, even if I got my butt kicked, it would be something memorable.
Sure. It'd be worthwhile for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe DJ Jackson, because I would love to wrestle DJ. And then obviously do jiu-jitsu as well. A buddy of mine, Greg Walker, beat him at an IBJJF Open and out wrestled him. And then when I grappled Greg, I was the one who was coming up on singles and doing things to Greg.
Okay.
So Greg wrestled for the Navy. I wrestled with the All Marine wrestling team. It's a little different, but I would do it for DJ. I would do it for JT Torres, or if Diego Bispo ever wanted a rematch because, he feels like I cheated by heel hooking him in the gi or whatever, like
sure. Right.
I would oblige him. But yeah, I'm not competing anymore. And, I think after 300 matches, like there's not much to prove.
Sure.
Well,
like you said, like you said, it's, because you have to put yourself into that, that program again, if you're going to compete. So it might as well be a dream match or something that you've always wanted to do. It's almost like a bucket list. It's like, hey man, if I'm going to do this, because I got to put 8 weeks in on top of whatever I regularly do every single day, I got to go hardcore, get my, everything fine tuned, and then, get that match. Not going to be for nothing, or for not that no one is worthy. It's just that, it has to be worth your while too. So,
but like I was saying, it's tough when there are people that are trying to throw money at Gordon just to even get up to be a blip on the radar and have a match with him.
Sure.
And it's like, man, I grappled him before it was cool. And I'm good with Gordon. And, when he had his secret gi training, I got to be at ground zero for that. So I grappled Gordon in the gi.
Oh,
so I
nice.
know all about that. He's still a killer, right? There's just really not much that excites me about competing at this point. And I'm not a medal chaser. I always did it to be able to battle test my material against a really resistant opponent and then bring it back to my academy and tell my students, hey, this works and this didn't. And so my ability to be a scientist and just experiment and do it in the field and come back with my findings, that's the real key. And to have the ability now to say that out of all of my wins, 97% were by submission, people know that it was these are closing remarks, right? I'm not going in there to play tag. I'm not like looking for one sweep in the last 10 seconds. I'm not putting on a shitty toe hold, making a poopy face and pretending like it's on to win an advantage. I was always going for the kill. And because of that, people know that it's about efficacy, right? I'm just trying to be the most efficient grappler possible. And they respect that. And then when you look at the losses and you're like, oh man, 50 some odd losses out of 300 matches, you're only winning, 70 whatever percent of the time. But it's like, yeah, but look at the losses. They're almost all on points.
Yeah.
So you're very hard to submit. You're very hard to submit, and you're submitting most people. And when you look at the people who are submitting you, and it's like, oh, well, it's Gordon Ryan, it's Taza, it's like some of the best guys in the weight class, best guys in the world.
Right.
You have really solid footing as an instructor and as somebody who's not just a competitor. You can say, hey, look, this is where things are working. This is where things aren't. And now I'm going to guide you to the promised land as well. And then I have some incredible students that are coming up now that, in a few years, these might be big names. And it's just great to watch them blossom and come up under my tutelage. So this is why I do it.
That's what I was going to ask you. Was it a great feeling to kind of pass that torch into coaching, into teaching? It was like, hey, I did my thing. I laid down 300 matches. I've been successful in doing this game for a long period of time. Now I'm going to take what I've learned. And like you said, I'm going back to my students and saying, look, this didn't work or this worked. And you have all that knowledge built up over time, all those matches. And so you're able to give that to them. Is that kind of where your passion went?
It did. And I'm still building other things too. So not just at home, but obviously the stuff I'm doing with Fanatics right now is really important to me, not just as a revenue stream. It's like, man, the money be damned. No one's getting into jiu-jitsu because they want to be rich. You get into jiu-jitsu because you love it. And then if you can make a dime off of it and it keeps you going, that's great. I get taken care of by Bernardo and Michael Zenga, and those guys are top notch. But the ability for me to just get my brand of jiu-jitsu out into a greater audience, you cannot put a price tag on that. So I've had so many people reach out to me just since the last 2 tutorials dropped, and they are blown away because they're like, oh man, this is an excellent supplement to what my instructor is telling me. And you broke it down in such a way that it didn't poo-poo on what I'm learning here, but it was just like great add-ons. And, that means more to me because it's the proliferation of the art that's going to keep us going into like the 2100s, the 2200s.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah. And that's what you alluded to, like with all the, passing that torch, and that's you kind of answered this already, because I like to ask guys, like, what do you want your legacy to be? And that's kind of what you're alluding to. That's, building that. It's not, the jiu-jitsu world community, I should say, it's not that big really in the grand scheme of things. It's not huge. And I haven't been in it very long, just a little over a year. And so I learned very fast, like, oh, wow, this is way different than anything I've ever seen, experienced my entire life. Everyone is awesome. Everyone, cares and stuff like that. And so when I talk to gentlemen like yourself, it's like, oh yeah, what's your legacy? Well, you're explaining that, like, you want to go on, like, you want to have that, you want people to know like your niche and what you did and how you taught and the type of person that you were. So that's awesome, man. Like it's just different. It's really hard to explain to people like what it means to be in this, I call it a family now.
Yeah,
That's
and
pretty cool.
Chad can throw his part in this too, because from experience, it's weird to watch somebody come in on their first class and you can't make any judgments. You just have to say, we'll see what happens in a month, we'll see what happens in a year. And some people might wash out, some people might surprise you and be black belts in 10 years, and you'll never know. So you just got to go in with an open mind and let people do some stuff. Sorry, that's my dog in the
It's all
background.
right.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah.
It's all good.
So it's interesting. I had a great lesson earlier today with, of all people, Robert Duvall's wife. And
Oh,
so,
wow. Nice.
yeah. And so, Academy Award winning actor Robert
Yeah.
Duvall, his wife, Luciana, is a purple belt, and she's a killer. And you wouldn't
Wow.
know.
Awesome. Yeah.
And you wouldn't know, because you would think, oh, and I don't mean to bash on anybody, but there are certain movie stars that wrap belts around their waist and you're like, that guy doesn't train, that girl doesn't train. And Luciana and I had like a pretty awesome role today for like 10 solid minutes. And then her lesson. And then, we talked a bit afterwards, and she's been doing it pretty solidly for like 8 years. And you wouldn't know, because she's not talking about it. She's not taking pictures in her gi and saying hashtag Jiu-Jitsu life. She's about it.
Right. That Chad and I were just talking about that this week. Like, a lot of people, and this, David, social media has changed the world of everything, obviously, but there are so many people now that use it as a written outlet versus a true outlet. It's like, you speak about the life, but you're not really about the life. Are you getting in the gym and working every single day like I do? And obviously I talk about it on this show, and Chad talks about it, but I don't go around talking about it. Like, I'm not bragging about it. I just don't. And I don't have to. It's like, I don't care. And other people, it's what you're alluding to. Like with her, she's not telling anybody,
Yeah. And I'm going to say something that's going to be relatively controversial, but when I look at the realm of social media platforms in general, I did a nice detox of about 2 years of no Facebook and almost a solid year of no Instagram. And I did this right on the heels of me stopping competing, because, John Robinson has taken care of me since early 2014 as one of my sponsors with Lanky. And then, I've had our dojo, Riley Bodycomb, Show the Art. Those guys took care of me. Abe and Marcos. And I've had, tons of sponsors through the years. And when I was competing and I was actively, just visible to the community, it was important to keep a social media presence. When I knew I was done competing, I just talked to all of them professionally and said, hey, I'm dialing it down. I'm going to be, getting away from this. I'm going to go on a social media diet. And then, I came back recently, like last December, to social media because I was getting ready to open an academy. And I thought that, the timing was right with all the restrictions being lifted in Virginia where I was at, that I could actually make it work. And as I get on, I'm seeing all these new faces that are like, weren't you a white belt a year ago or 2 years ago? And now you have like 10,000 followers, but you're cute. So I get it. And the jiu-jitsu community is full of dudes. And there's this thirst model around, cute girls in jiu-jitsu.
Sure.
And it just like bothers me, because it's like, man, I know all like 2,600 people that follow me on Instagram. And if I don't know you, I don't follow you, or I don't allow you to follow me.
Sure.
And I just keep it personal, because I don't want anybody to collect me as like a person. And if you had an interaction with me, or you bought my tutorial, or you just want to communicate, that's one thing. But if it's like you're passively going to like my pictures, screw that, man. I stay away from that garbage. Give that to the thirsty boys and let them have their thing. And for the ladies that are out there that are abusing the system so that they can ultimately make their next step into being like true influencers, I think it's garbage. It does nothing good for the sport. I want there to be more martial and less art, just personally.
That's a great way to say it. Like, I've never heard it that way. I like that a lot. Yeah.
And so I can say this pretty easily. Like last weekend, I was in Seattle doing a seminar, Bellingham, Washington, doing a seminar at my old school. And the week before that, I was at Fanatics in Boston with Jeff Curran. Now, Jeff Curran, out of Chicago, Big Frog, well-known MMA fighter, over 107 MMA fights. The only person on the planet Earth to fight for every Zuffa-owned organization. So UFC, Pride, WEC, Bellator, you name it, he fought for it. and also one of Pedro Sauer's first black belts, and put jiu-jitsu on the map of MMA for a lot of people in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s and beyond. So I was helping Jeff film his new tutorials that are coming out soon. Both of them are phenomenal. And I was learning the whole time I'm helping him film his stuff. And I'm like, I've trained with Jeff over the last 6 years pretty religiously. And I've made the 13-hour drive to Chicago and stayed for a week at a time and lived there for a little bit. And Jeff is one of my mentors in the sport still to this day. So when I was helping him out and we're talking about it, and we're like, man, the softening of jiu-jitsu is real. And the fact that you have people that think they're going to make it before they even like have a hard fought match. And it's like, dude, you can be a world beater in the gym, but if you don't go out and prove it against somebody you don't train with on the regular, you're not doing it. And if you're doing it only at a local level, you can only expect local success. If you're not going on pay-per-views, you're not doing, Fight to Win Pro, you're not doing X, Y, and Z, you don't merit any of the accolades that other people get. And you can't just steal that via social media. So yeah, Jeff and I have a very different respect for the people that are out there, like really grinding it out and doing the hard work. And it comes from a different mentality, right? Like we talked about it a little bit ago, Tyler, when we were talking about wrestling mentality. If you don't know what it's like to just get beat so badly to the point where like you're looking at your fingertips and they're like pruny from just over sweat,
Sure. Yeah.
You've never had that hard day in the gym. Okay, cool. Come back and do it a second time that day.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu. Yeah. And Chad, you get it, man. Like I've seen people that are like hey man, I got one more round in me. It's like, yeah, okay, you need to go home before we even do this. You're the one and done guy. You've been saving it all up to blow your load on this one roll in the gym with a 40-year-old dude who's maybe a hobbyist, and you're going to feel really great for crushing that tomato can, and then you're going to go home and think you're a world beater. No, show me the person who's shark tanking themselves from a deficit every position with the entire class, and then they come back for the midday class and do it again, and they come back for the evening class and do it again. And I'll show you somebody who's going to have real results. And I'm not in the path of trying to make competitors. I just want better grapplers. And I feel like the false positives you can get from just coming in, doing the warm-ups with a lackadaisical mindset of just, I shadow boxed it roughly, or I pantomimed the motion, monkey see, monkey do. And I might've done my 3 decently attributed rolls, and then I got a little sweat. I'm going home. Cool. I feel like I did something. Man, if you are a hobbyist and you have no other goals, great. If you're a lady who says I am in this for self-defense, that's not going to cut it. A fight's not going to be that. And maybe it's more of the military in me than I hope, but it's like, you train like you fight like you train. If you go in and you're just like, and I said this before, you're playing tag. You're just like, I do a move, I let you do a move. We're laughing, we're joking. Man, that's great. Everyone's enjoying themselves. It's fun. But don't come up to me, a year from now and be like, hey, coach, I feel like I plateaued. It's like, no, man, I'm going to look at you dead in the eye and I'm going to say, no, you didn't plateau. You have to at least climb before you come over.
Sure.
Like, you didn't even climb yet.
Yeah.
You're like, you started at 0 and you stayed at 0. And, it's a hard conversation to have, but this is another reason why I think it's important that every instructor talks to their students on a one-on-one basis and asks more than just so what brings you in, or, whatever. It's like the science of philosophy is just asking one more question. So if I say, what brought you in? And they say, always wanted to learn this. Okay. Why? Now they have to give you something extra. And when they give you that something extra, you might say, why again? And if you finally get to the root of that, you'll know better how to train that person or how to leave them be. Because there are like roughly 4 different types of students out there. And only one of those 4 types of students is an avid learner. And the other 3 are just looking for excuses, whether they're the bully who needs a place to like showcase that they're the tough person, the vacationer who's just looking for a place to not a place to be to not be home or not be at work, or the know-it-all, the person who wants to showcase that they have some secret information that the instructor doesn't have because they own the internet. And so
that's the YouTube corner, right?
yeah, and that's fine, like
I'm joking, but not joking, because you know what I'm talking about. There's always
I totally get it.
a group of guys in the corner going over the YouTube show.
Well, and you know what? Number 1 and 4 aren't going to last very long. The tough guy and the know-it-all is going to, weed themselves out very, very fast.
I agree. And I love the concept of having mat enforcers that are small for that reason, because you'll prove the know-it-all and the bully wrong right off the bat.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, this 110-pound purple belt female just waxed you. What's your excuse?
Yeah.
And I love when the excuses start flowing. Because then it's like, cool. So why are you here again? Oh, well, I'm just doing this as a hobby. Okay, cool. I saw you crushing that blue belt or that white belt before. Why aren't you being a mentor? Why aren't you helping them? If this is just a hobby and you have nothing to prove, I look around and then I say, hey, did anybody see where I put the podium? Like,
Sure.
what are you trying to earn tonight? But, long story short, when I think about the 4 different types of students who can come in, I'm very grateful that avid learners do make up the majority of people that come into this art, because it is not something that average people just back up into accidentally.
Right.
Sure.
You see Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and we're in the 21st century. You probably have a television or some kind of streaming service, or you've watched at least one Marvel movie with some fight choreography, and before you know it, you're like, oh, this is legit. You do a quick cursory overview of a Google search, and then you get a bunch of pictures coming up, and you're like, well, Wikipedia says I better be prepared for this. I better hydrate. You get that person who's like, oh, I just needed the closest martial arts to my school. It's like, boy, did you choose wrong. This is the attrition rate is ridiculous, and I don't attribute it to any one factor outside of the realistic approach to the training, which is like, you're gonna put in time, you're gonna get bumped. It's bodies moving in space. No one makes it to the higher ranks without some kind of minimal injury at best, or a debilitating injury sometimes.
Sure.
And that's very, very savage. But when I think of people who are like, fresh into boot camp and they're telling their boot camp stories at night, like, after this, I'm going to MARSOC, I'm going special forces. It's like, buddy, you got to make it through this. Like, get you a blue belt. Then we'll talk about, how you're going to
sure.
beat. Then we'll talk about how you're going to beat, Wiltsy at the who's next,
Chad and I, and we talk about this a lot, is jiu-jitsu is not for everybody, or is it for everybody? Like, what's your take on that? We throw this around. We ask a lot of people this, and Chad has go ahead, Chad.
Well, I don't know, after I go back and forth after our podcast last week. We had George Gergel on, and he kind of made me think about it a little different, where we want to say jiu-jitsu is for everybody. And then I would say, well, jiu-jitsu has the potential to be for everybody, but it's not jiu-jitsu's fault if it's not for them, is what George said. So they're making the excuse, or they're not following through, or it's not jiu-jitsu, it's what they can't adapt to or whatever.
So I like that a lot. The only little change I would make is jiu-jitsu as an activity is something that I think everybody should try. And then in the course of trying it, you will find out, or someone will explicitly make you feel as if it's not right for you.
Right. There you go.
So as able-bodied grapplers, the 3 of us can go in and have no real setbacks outside of bad habits when we get on the mat.
Mm-hmm.
But I've taught people that are para athletes, who have, like, my one student, Raul Cruz, he's an amputee above the knee on his right leg. I have a student that was out on the West Coast who I just worked with last week, Jess Munter, who had a brachial nerve injury being born and doesn't have full use of her left arm.
Oh, wow.
And I've never heard them complain about not being able to do jiu-jitsu as a whole. What I hear instead is, how can I troubleshoot the pathways to make this work for me as if I were an able-bodied grappler? And then, for example, I took a seminar with Marcelo Garcia and I took 2 pages of notes as a black belt, right? And that's a big deal. Normally you might have one eureka moment out of 2 hours of work, but I took 2 pages of notes with Marcelo, and that makes sense with him being like the GOAT, right?
Sure.
and yet I took a seminar a year later with Pete McGregor, 10th Planet purple belt in Vancouver, Canada. And Pete can't use any musculature lower than his rib cage. And I took 5 pages of notes.
Wow.
Because the jiu-jitsu is so wildly different when he can't shrimp, bridge, hip height, turn, do an abdominal crunch. And it's like the things he's doing with just head positioning, shoulder work, shoulder walking, elbows, man, like I'm still learning. And I showed up, I wasn't a first degree black belt, but I was a black belt, and I showed up to this purple belt seminar and I took 5 pages of notes, you know? And it's like, man, what kind of person would I be if I walk in thinking I know everything? You encounter people that go into jiu-jitsu thinking they have this general understanding of what they're going to encounter when they walk in, and they've already closed their minds to what it's going to take to get them to actually learn a thing. It's hard to make somebody unlearn a preconceived notion, right? They made an entire movie on this called Inception. Like, you can't make somebody have an original idea. Once they get the idea, it's actually hard to kill it.
Sure.
So we as instructors and we as practitioners need to be as open-minded as we can, and we need to be in some kind of role allowing a conducive learning experience for our students that starts with, I will field your questions, but your questions need to be either tactical or technical. And if it's technical, I am the person who's going to give you the technique. If it's tactical because you're trying to figure out a when or a what if, you have to just remind yourselves that it's grappling, bro. They're gonna grab you. They're gonna do X, Y, and Z. I can give you a few different options, but nothing is foolproof. Otherwise, we would call it the armbar, the scissor sweep, and there wouldn't be variance.
Sure. Right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about that almost every class. Somebody will say, well, what if they grab your hand? Well, it's going to happen, you know?
The what if moments.
Yeah, that's what jiu-jitsu is.
Yeah, trust us. Between Chad and I, it's like, we've been there. We're giving you the best of the variants. So there would have been like 10 ways this thing could have been done. This is not only the most common, but this is the best practice for this. Sure, they can grab your hand. Sure, they can do a backflip. You know, you figure out some weird crap that a wild maniac would do. And it's like, man, we've thought of it, or it's just not likely. And this is the path. Oh, well, you know, everybody's trying to be the Riddler and they're trying to stump Batman with their thing. And it's like, slow down, man, you know, riddle me this. What if they grab your hand? And it's like, dude, my life's not in danger if they grab my hand. If they grab my hand, they're not punching me. If they grab my hand and they're not locking it to some other part of their body, or they're not isolating it, they're just grabbing my hand.
Sure.
I say this on the regular with my students. I'll be like, one of my favorite things in jiu-jitsu, and it predominantly happens in the gi, but it sometimes happens with no gi as well. People get to a grip that they think is so great, so good, that they're ready to die on that shield. And I call it drowning in armor, because you thought your Kimura grip was going to save you, or you thought that hand deep in my collar was going to be half of a choke later. And now I submit you, and you just got to be the person who lost while hanging on.
Yeah. It's a good way to see it and look at it too, for sure. Yeah. It's a good way to teach it, especially to younger white belts or anybody, honestly. You know, it's like, hey.
Yeah. I'm trying to keep my language in check.
You can say whatever you want. It's okay.
I'm just going to say this one phrase, because I think it needs to get more traction as a whole in the adult jiu-jitsu community. The idea of grip fucking, and people will just throttle you with their hand. And it's like, dude, you know, you're not getting anywhere. You're just like aggressively shaking my gi around, or, you know, you're grabbing my wrist for dear life, but you have no end game for what you're going to do with it when you get there. And I love when people do it to me when there's something on the line, but I hate when it's a training environment where everyone should be learning and trying to work on a thing. You're not letting me work on a thing, and you're not working on a thing. You're just resisting, or you're You're thinking that this has more value. And it's like, dude, you can grip fuck me for 5 minutes, or you can let me move and you can move and we can figure out where to actually fix the position.
Sure.
So that's a big takeaway.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we're doing jujitsu. Sometimes in the gym, if I happen to sit out or somebody comes in and I have to, attend to a customer or something, I'll come back on the mats, and we usually do 6-minute rounds. And I'll have 2 white belts that have been standing on their feet for 4.5 minutes. They're like, all right, it's somebody pull guard, somebody do some jujitsu, right? Like, it's not a tournament. We got to get, do some jujitsu.
Do something.
Yeah. And to kind of just steer us into a different topic, it's like when you see clear-cut examples of like how a student isn't growing because they're afraid of failure. It's like one of my favorite things to do, especially when the class is a little light on black belts. Let's say there's like, I don't know, 20 white belts, half a dozen blue belts, some purple belts, and a sprinkling of brown belts, maybe another black belt. I'll say, hey guys, do you know what I have more of than anyone else in this class combined? Losses. Now, I've been doing this so long that I have tens of thousands of failures. But the difference is I have hundreds of thousands of little victories. And it's because I didn't stop when something went wrong. I was like, okay, this is wrong. And I changed it and I moved on. And, you have to accumulate those little losses all the time before you can ever hope to be good. The cartoon Adventure Time, there was this one scene where it's like, sucking at something's the first step to being good at something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
it applies.
Chad, that's telling me weeks ago. I mean,
yeah, I told Terry, Terry's like, I suck at jujitsu. I'm like, you should, right? I mean, you're a year in, and part of that year was COVID. So, you don't have any mat time. There was a night where I wasn't at the gym. One of my brown belts taught class, and he did line drills, the pass, sweep, or submit drill. And Terry had to have somebody started in mount on top of him. And it's different in that situation, where you can't get out.
I was just confused. It was like fast confusion. I'll be 44 tomorrow. And I was like,
oh, sweet. Happy birthday. Early.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. It threw me off because I was just so used to training and then rolling. And I'll get after it when I roll, have good hard rolls, but not spazzy. I really like to embrace the failure. I love the darkness of it. Like, it's like, it sounds maybe kind of dumb, but it's like, well, I'm going to grind into darkness. I was talking to George about this on another show that we did with him. And I said, if you don't embrace that darkness, you're not going to get good. So if I don't embrace the failure, I'm not going to get good at this, so I'm okay with that. Since I've walked in the gym, I've never had that problem. It was like, no, this is something, when you said this earlier, I was like, yeah, it was always something I wanted to do, but it was also something for me. It was like, I want to see who I am. I want to see who I am mentally. Like, what kind of puzzle person am I? Because I do this at home. I've done martial arts in the past, but not this type. So it was like, oh, this is something different. I really want to do this. And I fell in love with it, so on and so forth, but that line drill night, I was like, what? It was the drive home in the truck, no music on, like, what am I doing? Like, I'm terrible at this. And Chad, we're always texting each other and stuff and, doing the show and whatnot. And he texted me, he's like, hey man, how was class? And I was like, my instant reaction was, I suck at jujitsu. That was my response. That was it. It was like, and he was like, you don't suck. And then, we talked about it. I was like,
did Chad
all
give
right.
you the thumbs up emoji? Like, did Chad like heart your comment?
Yes. And then I took a cold shower. No, I didn't die.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's the thing. And I went back the very next night, which was not a problem. Yeah. Went back the next night. And then it was like, Chad alluded to, don't focus on just doing certain things. And you shouldn't beat specifically upper ranked belts. Like, you're in a position where you're still learning. So yeah, sometimes you're going to get in certain positions, but you're not really, you shouldn't be at your ranking and what and your knowledge. You really shouldn't be beating them. So yeah, you were going against a lot of upper ranked belts to where they were quick, and it was demoralizing for me for that just moment, because I haven't experienced that yet in my short journey. But then I was very passive with it. Moved on, just needed thumbs up from my coach that I suck.
Perfect. Right where you need to be.
Yes.
To kind of highlight that, when I see somebody who has either a positive result for doing the wrong thing or a negative result, but in the pursuit of doing the right thing, I let them know, because false positives will lead people into building terrible habits. And then having a bad reaction while doing the right thing will steer somebody away from putting in the extra work to then make it that actual move. And this is a very real thing that happens on the regular. And so when I tell people like false positives are the worst thing that could ever happen to you, you're like, but it worked. It's like, yeah, but there's a point where it doesn't. So one of my mentors and good friends is the sambist Riley Bodycomb. And Riley is also, he's a master of ceremonies in Sambo, but he's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt.
Oh, nice.
And I've worked with him a bunch over the years. Whenever he would come to like Ryan Hall's gym, because I'm so close to Ryan and I was training with Ryan a lot at the time, like I would get to train with Riley. And,
nice, man. That's awesome.
Anyway, Riley and I are also big fucking nerds. So one night, Ryan Hall, Riley, myself, and it's like, man, right there, you got like 3 killers on the mats, and we're all playing freaking Magic the Gathering, right?
That's what I was gonna say. Like when you put Ryan Hall in there too, because obviously I've listened to him, and Chad and I have talked about him before, and I'm like, yeah, Ryan's he's got that kind of thing. Yeah, you guys are playing Magic the Gathering. I can see that. but
it's something I played since the 90s as a teenager and stuff.
It's awesome, man. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's great. And it's cerebral, there's strategy, there's randomness in the shuffle and everything, right? So you have to deal with a lot of different things. But there's a specific card that's worth mentioning, and for anybody listening, there's only so much I need to say for you to understand this analogy, which is you play creatures, your creatures fight the other person, you win after you do enough damage. And there are some things that you can play to remove the other dude's creatures or whatever, right? And so there's this one spell in the game called Doomblade. And Doomblade will kill anything on the board as long as it is not the color black. Now, there are 5 colors in the game. I don't care about the other colors for this analogy. It's just the fact that Doomblade doesn't work on black creatures. So we're at a seminar and Riley hears somebody say, oh man, that was awesome. And Riley goes, yeah, but it's a Doomblade. And the guy didn't get the reference. And I'm dying inside because I'm like, oh, but it doesn't work on black belts. And so, when he talks about like, there are certain moves that'll work until they don't. Right. And when you have a student who's in the pursuit of something and they have a false positive, they might be like, oh, well, I'm going to do this forever. And it's like, well, it'll work until it doesn't. And where it might fail is at blue belt or at purple or at brown, and most of the time at black. And I try my best to not show like seminar moves, like things that just look cool. I want to show people the efficiency of a move and make it to where it'll work for their whole lives. Because I spent so much time cutting off the fat on my game to be so submission focused and ready to end it within 3 moves wherever I'm at, that I would be remiss to then peddle a different kind of jiu-jitsu to a student, even if they're not my student. Like I don't want anybody to have a false positive or just see a cool move and be like, cool, I got this move, and then hit it on like a purple belt or try it on a purple belt and get crushed. Because not only is it detrimental to their trust in me as an instructor, but it's going to send them down a darker path of their jiu-jitsu where they're just like, this shit doesn't actually work. And that's not the case at all. It's like, you just have to know some flashy moves look cool, but you have to realize when you can do that, when you have a size advantage, when there's a skill gap, when there's, an injury involved, or when there's like, fatigue, whatever the case is, that's when you can do that cool, flashy thing. I myself, I think that for the most part, the later years of my competition, it was a lot of flash that there shouldn't have been. And I regret it now. But, especially when you're trying to keep sponsors, you don't want to be that person who's winning a boring match. So you have to like just shoot for the moon on every single match. And I think about like the toll it took on my body, and it wasn't the greatest, and you can do it better. So now it's like, man, older, wiser, more efficient, and just don't really focus too much on like the cool new thing or the fluff, and really just refine that foundation and make those things popping. And last I checked, an armbar still works.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely. That's as I said, my short journey, that's what I'm doing now. It's just like, you know what? Learn how to do this one thing, or I listen to Chad probably about everything when it comes to jiu-jitsu. And I'm like,
Good.
yep, no submissions this week, not going for anything. I'm just going to work on specifics, and I'm just going to work on this one little thing. Or after I had the situation where it was like mounted, not that I didn't, but you know, the senior belts, it was like, didn't know what I was doing, or I struggled obviously getting them out, or getting out of the mount. So I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to get in this position, and I'm just going to keep working it and keep working it.
Well, and that's where we talked about small goals. There's nothing wrong with small goals. You know, obviously you maybe black belt is your big goal, and it should be, but for that night with Terry, it's like, all right, if you were mounted for 5 minutes, we'll go extreme. Only let him mount you for 3 minutes next time. That's a small win. You know, sometimes we have to take those things. And if you're, like he alluded to a little bit ago, if your goal is to come in and tap one of the black belts, you have the wrong goal. You know, so
yeah, that's,
you know,
never one of my goals.
Well, no.
It's funny when it was one of my goals, I failed at it miserably.
Yeah, let it happen.
When it wasn't my goal, but I had a different one in mind. Summer of 2014, I was in Rio de Janeiro with Pedro Sauer for his immersion camp. I was still a purple belt. I was gonna be getting my brown belt that trip, but I was still a purple belt at the time, and I was at a school that I'm not going to mention publicly, but anybody who knows this story knows where it was. And, there's a famous person with a famous last name running a class, and he had 9 black belts there, and we brought 4 on our trip, 4 black belts. One being Greg Nelson, another being Mike Horahan, this guy Tiago, and then Nate Homey. And so we had 4 black belts that paired with 4 of their black belts. We had 4 brown belts: Mark Kukro, Robin Clark, and 2 others who escaping my mind right now. So 4 brown belts go with the 4 more black belts. So they had 1 black belt left over. I'm the highest ranking purple belt. So I get a black belt for my first roll at this premier gym in Rio. 30 seconds into the roll, because Pedro Sauer was standing right over me with this famous guy, I'm just making sure that I don't embarrass Pedro. That was my only goal. 30 seconds in, I tap this guy. And now this other guy, the instructor with a coral belt, you know, he's well-known guy in the area, grabs me, stops the match, walks me across the mats, points to one of the bigger black belts, taps him, and is like, "You guys are done training. You train with him." Now, I don't speak Portuguese, but that's what happened. And now I'm grappling this guy, and Pedro and him walk around the mat and are standing right over us again. Same goal. Don't make Pedro look bad. I tapped this guy. By the end of the night, I was the only gringo to not get a rest round, and I grappled every black belt multiple times.
Wow.
And by the end of the night, I tapped out all 9 of their black belts. Some of them super quick, some of them with a little bit of more grit. But my goal was the same every time. Just don't make Pedro look bad. Just don't make him look bad. And it's funny how just reverting to like, okay, these frames are important. This is important. These are the things that I would be, I would make him look bad for doing, because I'd be like, you know, trying to make a move as opposed to steal a move. And, you know, it kind of like built this weird mythos for me that I wasn't intending to build. But then it also highlighted one valuable thing. The belt won't save your ass. And at the end of the day, if you're not doing the right thing at the right time, you're doing the wrong thing, because a perfect move with terrible timing is a terrible move. And a decent move, or a low hanging fruit, but at the perfect time, is the right tool for the job. And, you know, subsequently Americans weren't invited back to that gym for multiple years. And, you know, I went back the following year and I wasn't allowed to go there. I went
Nice
back.
job. Nice job, David.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm just kidding.
Okay. I'm losing all the sleep over it. I'm losing all the sleep.
Clearly.
But then I went back there a third time in 2019, and I was actually allowed to go in there and train. And now, you know, I'm a black belt, and some of these guys remembered me from the first time. And it's like okay for you to lose to a black belt. It's like, no, dude, we're all human. Sometimes you'll get a D1 wrestler who's just going to rip your arm off, and you got to be okay with that. You got to be okay with thinking like the belt isn't the best thing. beating a belt doesn't mean anything. Just do good grappling and try to protect yourself at all times. And if you're doing that, you're winning.
Sure.
It's simple.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. I mean, in the grand scheme of what you're doing, yes, that statement there and that phrase. You're going to say, what were you going to say? It's simple?
Well, jiu-jitsu is simple, not easy.
Right. Yes.
The mechanics you can learn with time and practice, and you put enough energy in, right? But man, there's nothing easy to it. Like you said earlier, going back, knowing what you have in store for you every day, every other day, however your frequency allows you to go, it's tough and it's demanding. But what it does to your personality and your life is priceless. You're gonna be a person who can troubleshoot a lot of scenarios that your peers that don't do jiu-jitsu just crumble under. And it's like, once you have that 280-pound dude with high mount who's kind of letting their belly out of their gi, or their rash guard's a little wet and it's waterboarding you, and you got out of that and you're like, oh, but I didn't die. Next thing you know, you're in traffic and you're like, well, this isn't so bad.
Yes.
You know, like, oh, that bumped into my shopping cart. It's like, man, that guy didn't take my back and slip a wrist under my chin. Okay, I'm okay. But you know, think of like the one time you've been in a tight submission and compare it to like what normally aggravates you. It's like, oh man, my Netflix is down. It's like, who cares? You're like,
yeah, right. Other things become very meaningless, you know, in your life. Like, not in a bad way, but they just do, like stuff like that. Like you're saying, David, it's like traffic. It's just like, whatever, man. Like, you guys want to move it along here? Okay. I'm hanging out.
Yeah. Now, to kind of tie this in, you asked about the Brabo right away. And the Brabo is obviously something that I put all the work into. And it's still not like my pride and joy. I think in terms of like my development in jiu-jitsu, the thing that got to be the thing that I am most proud of is finding pockets of comfort in spite of my opponent's best efforts to make me uncomfortable. And it's such an intangible thing because it's a mental state and a little bit of physicality. But, you know, I get this with competitors and hobbyists alike, where they go, how do I, in spite of, you know, whether it's claustrophobia or just fear of losing or whatever it is, how do I, in spite of that, beat this thing that's inside me and focus on the move? Because sometimes I just can't focus. I'm too busy thinking about what they're doing to me. And I go back to you know, earlier times when I had what I called the will to win, and then when I met Pedro and I developed the skill to win. When I had the will to win, it was that wrestler's mentality of, well, I'll outwork them. I might not have the best technical skill, but you know, when I left the Marine Corps, I was 215 pounds, pretty fit. And I was just beating people to the punch with, you know, the level of athleticism I can bring to the grapple, even though my stable of moves was very narrow. And that was a false positive, right? I had success doing it the wrong way, but I knew the correction that needed to happen. So when I got out of the military, I found the most technical instructor I could, and I ate everything he said for my supplements. You know, like that was my breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Sure.
Was his technique. And then it went from the will to win to the skill to win. But the underlying thing was I still wanted it, right? Like that will never left me. I just finally put the horse before the cart. And now it's like I have all these techniques driving this desire. And you can't teach that. So when you try to see if people have it or not, you know, and Chad, please chime in, like positional sparring makes or breaks people. You put someone in a live grapple, they're going to do their go-to, right? On a blank canvas, it's like, I know my one takedown, I know my one guard pass, I know my one positional, I know my one submission, and they'll do it. Now take that same person and put them anywhere other than that blank canvas where they can't do what they want, and you'll see what their mental fortitude is like. I love doing that as an instructor because it's going to make the student grow. But more importantly, it's nice for me to then figure out, like we talked about those 4 types of students, where that person falls in that arrangement.
Sure.
Yeah. But anyway.
No, that's awesome. It actually is really good for me personally to hear that, because that's what I felt like. And it, with that, just going back to that line drill thing, it's like I was put in a position to where I can't, I'm not going to say I've never been there. I've been mounted. I'm years and years and years of learning left to do, but it was like, okay, I need to build on this. Like, I'm going to come back and I'm going to conquer this. I'm going to get better at this. Even if I'm in this bad position, I'm not going to panic or not think I don't know what I'm doing. And those situational things, or now when I roll, I will purposely go in thinking, all right, I know the goal is like, hey, I want to do this, but I will go in and go, I'm going to get in this position because I want to work out. So I will let myself get into that position. And now, yes, it's 50-50. I'm one person, that person's another. So I give them 100% credit for them being able to get where they want to be. But I will get into a position and go, okay, now I'm going to try to work from here. Like I'll, be in a bad position just from that. So yeah, when you state it that way, it really piggybacks off of what Chad has taught, tremendously over my last year of learning.
What I think,
you mean jiu-jitsu not that different? Holy shit. Hey, either of you guys ever watched the older Gene Hackman movie Hoosiers basketball movie?
Yeah.
It's been a while, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great
so
movie.
People think of like the quintessential like sports movies as like Rocky, or like some fucking weirdo is going to say the Mighty Ducks, whatever. Right. Like when I think of like the quintessential sports movies, it's like, it comes down to like 2 things for me. One is Vision Quest, and then the other is Hoosiers. And they're for totally different reasons. Right. One, because there's just really not a lot of good wrestling movies. And although Vision Quest was cheesy and had like its campy moments, the whole thing, like, think you'll make the weight, it's just like the psychological warfare in that movie was so on point. But with Hoosiers, it was a different side of the mental state. You had these amazing basketball players across town, and then these other kids who are like, the up and comers. And when Gene Hackman takes them to their gym, busts out the ladder, drops the tape measure and goes, still 10 feet. And it's like, yeah, man, we're all working with the same shit here. And
sure.
when it's like, man, instructors will have their like little seasoning that they put on moves, but they're still working with the human body.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to change that much. And kind of something I want to like, not end on a high note, but when I think of things I want to really get out, it's like when a student leaves a particular school to find success at another school, it's one of my favorite things to laugh about. Because it's like, dude, the grass isn't greener on the other side. It's greener where you water it. You didn't put in the work here. You're not going to put in the work there. Mm-hmm. No magical instructor is going to make you better. Now, if you're getting actively recruited by a gym that has a heavy level of exposure and you're doing it for the attention or what else, like, okay, you know what you're doing, but there's a difference. Like, you have to put in the hard work here if you're going to do anything elsewhere. And it's usually the other way around. It's usually some person who thinks there's a shortcut just because they go to another gym. Anyway, that's a thing.
Oh, I like that theory. We talked about on several podcasts about loyalty and stuff. And you being around the game, some people leave and go to other places, and it really used to bother me, but not as much as it used to. It's like, you have to concentrate on who wants to be there. And that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Well, if you guys had a question for me that I didn't answer, what would it be? Because I'm trying to think. Like, we talked about like
you covered everything, man.
We talked about respect. We talked about mechanics.
How long were you a Marine?
I was in for 4 years. I went in kind of late. I was 25 when I went in. It's the worst thing I ever did. I wouldn't do it again, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Sure. Right.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for your service, man. Appreciate you.
No sweat, man. Did it for the wrong reasons, I think. But it ultimately did right things for me. I needed to really change my lifestyle at a point when I was like very self-centered. And this was when I was doing professional MMA, and it was all about like me. And so I didn't really do a lot of team sports like wrestling. It's individual effort towards team success. It was just weird. And when I went to the Marine Corps, it was, all about the team success, one team, one fight. If we all don't make it back, we all lose. So
Sure.
it was very necessary for my development as just a better human being. And I needed it. And I knew I needed it. So, it came at the right time, even though I look back and it's like, man, this is something a younger person should have done. You don't think there's a difference between 18 and 25 until you're the 25-year-old.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's awesome though. I mean, it
Yes.
builds,
Yeah.
it's a huge, obviously it's clear of who you are today and, what you've done and, to tie back in of, your legacy, what you're doing and teaching your students. And that all helps. That 4-year window out of everything that you've done in your life, I'm sure there's some stuff in there that helps you project what you're teaching your students and the attitude and, giving that information to them. So that's awesome. Good on you, man. That's cool.
Yeah. Now they all know what makes grass grow.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. They know how to get that hose out and water it. By the way, Vision Quest, it's in my top 5, maybe sports movies. It's up there. It's a great old movie. Red Rider, Lunatic Fringe. One of my favorite songs.
I had that as my alarm clock for some years, it was great.
I always want to hear someone walk out to that song. In a fight. Yeah. I'm like, no one's ever done that.
I've done Fight to Win Pro like 4 times. I've done a few other super fights where you get walkout music, and it's always been like a missed opportunity. And I think about it every time the song comes up. I should have done that, But
that's awesome, dude. Well, hey man, how you want to call out your school and your socials and all your sponsors, obviously, and anything else you want to bring up for sure.
No, totally. So I have a school that's getting started up again on the East Coast, Function Jiu-Jitsu. It's going to be in Herndon, Virginia. Awesome. We're going to have all that going up live in the next few weeks. Function is what I'm about, so it just made sense that it would be Function. And then, I used to be Dave Darce on Instagram, but then when I went to the Northwest, I met an older Brazilian guy who became one of my friends and mentors. And at the time, he didn't understand that my last name wasn't Darce. So he started calling me Professor Darce. So I ended up having to change my Instagram. So it's Lanky Mongoose, which is, a time for like my Merkatsu.
Very cool, man.
Artwork and my persona. And then on Facebook, nothing special. I try to stay away from Facebook as much as possible, but
sure.
Facebook is more for like friends and family at this point. And
right
Instagram on. Is where like all of my jujitsu marketing. In terms of like some other things, the tutorials I have on BJJ Fanatics, it's really easy for a lot of people to look at the Darce Brabo stuff that I had a ton of success with and not see the forest for the trees. And I think the real hidden gem is the Deconstructing Defense tutorial, because it shows you the pathways for how to be successful in spite of grips, hooks, and frames, and how to get past those very typical structures that will slow us down in a grapple. That way, it's plug and play. If you like Americanas or you like cross chokes or you like any submission, it shows you how to get to the places where you can hit them despite your opponent's best efforts to not let you get there. And then, the total knee bar tutorial is a great tool, but it was more like I looked at the catalog of things that were on Fanatics, and there's so many leg attacks on just heel hooks or to a lesser degree straight ankle locks, but there were none save one Sambo knee bar tutorial. And I was like, we need to do better as a community. So I just really wanted to add my flavor to it, because I have,
nice.
Like a dozen or so competition knee bars from a lot of different places. It just also felt weird to teach like the over under knee bar in Bernardo's place. Like you're the guy,
yeah.
But, Michael Zenga's told me only positive things about those tutorials, but I think the hidden gem, if anybody's still listening, is the Deconstructing Defense. I think if you get the Darce one, it might be great for, 10% of the community. If you get the knee bar one, it's not going to be for everybody who likes legs, because you might like heel hooks more because of allure to having the quicker, more catastrophic finish. And the ankle lock, is a little bit more user friendly. So the knee bar is kind of in weird design space, but it's a brilliant module. The Deconstructing Defense, it's like 50 friggin' videos on how to just rip apart an entire person's career. So I love it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the gem. And Michael Zenga and Bernardo Faria, they want me to come back 2 more times this year at least to film more stuff.
Very cool, man.
I was in Pedro Sauer's 2 tutorials on Fanatics, his side control escapes and his mount mastery. I was in Jeff Curran's that are, if they're not dropping next week, they're going to drop the week after. He did one on what we call the battle tested back harness, where he just shows all the ways of using a seatbelt control, whether they clear your hooks or not, to just completely own the person. And then he did another one, which he called the sweeps, which was on, the forgotten sweep, which is on just scissor sweeping and how to make the scissor position a hub for like, I don't know, 24 different setups. And it was incredible because, like I said, I'm in his tutorial as Izuke and I'm learning the whole time. Like Jeff is a wellspring of knowledge. So it'll be good to be like fixing that balance, because right now it's like I have 3 of my own tutorials, but I've been the guy who gets his ass kicked in 4. So, 2 for Pedro, 2 for Curran. And I'm still looking to get some of the other hidden talents from Pedro's, like Rylan Lazares. He's Max Holloway's jiu-jitsu coach out of Hawaii. People might not know it, but he's got one of the best Sao Paulo passes in the world, which is why when I had my match with Dylan Royce at Fight to Win Pro, his Sao Paulo pass never worked. Like after 20 attempts, he still couldn't Sao Paulo pass. And it's like, man, I'm dealing with Rylan every time he comes to town. So Rylan, I hope he does a tutorial on that. Johnny Carlquist, James Garner, these guys in Utah, they're savages. Greg Nelson, incredible trainer. Rose Namajunas just won the UFC title, and Greg's one of her coaches, good friend of mine. Pedro Sauer's first black belt. He's just unbelievable. So yeah, just me spreading the good word of these guys and some of the mechanics that we have to share greater community at whole. I'm never going to be wealthy doing jiu-jitsu, but if I know that my mechanics help somebody, that's the real wealth for me. So, get my stuff on a daily deal. You're not hurting my feelings. Like, it's not about that. It's just like, I want more people to see what I've learned from, almost 20 years doing this, most of it the wrong way. And now how I've kind of fixed that up. So that's it.
Sure. Yeah. That goes back to what I alluded to earlier. That's your legacy, man. Like, that's what you're doing, and people have to understand this. Everyone that's listening, go out there and support David. Check out his tutorials and everything on BJJ Fanatics. I tell people, like, don't sell yourself short. Like, you've put a ton of time in, you've learned a ton, and now it's like you're at a position in your life to where you're like, you know what, I'm going to pass this forward. So it's your legacy. So in 30 years from now, like you said, like, people are going to look back and be like, hey man, did you see this DVD or whatever, versus when you first started, and Chad's talked about this before, like, you guys were getting VHSs and you were, fighting the neighborhood kids or whatever, not fighting them, but, practicing on them guys or whatever you could do to try to get stuff.
So Chad, real quick, you'll appreciate the shit out of this. I remember in 2005, I drove 6 hours to learn offensive half guard.
Wow.
Because in 2005, half guard was like, oh, you mean the position that you're halfway to getting past?
Right.
And like, for people to be like pulling half guard and making it be their hub,
Their game,
it was unheard of. And it was like, I remember like Francisco Mansour, he's a red belt now, but he was a red belt then too.
Oh wow.
Wow.
And, he was telling all of his students, man, this is the future of jiu-jitsu. And it's like, what did I know? I didn't know anything. I was like, I'll take it for what it's worth. And only now do I realize how crazy that is. Yeah. But yeah, it's the game. Like I said, I can't wait, Tyler. In 10 years, when you're teaching me jiu-jitsu, it's going to be awesome, dude, because you're going to have so many tools that are just launched forward on the backs of other people, like bringing you up.
Sure.
So I'll actually end with this. Like, think of jiu-jitsu like a relay race where you have multiple track lanes, which would be like the different teams of jiu-jitsu, whether it's for sport, for self-defense, whatever, right? And in any individual lane, you have the people who came before us with other people in their lanes running, and they have to do that baton handoff, right? And at one point, the student has to start running and the instructor is running behind them and they have to be neck and neck for that handoff. Otherwise the baton doesn't get passed off perfectly. And then that student goes running and then the professor or the instructor eventually stops their leg of the race. And then they have to pass it to then what's going to be their student and their student and their student. And it's just incredible to watch the transition because like I'm watching as like Pedro Sauer himself just got shoulder surgery. He's slowing down. He's going to be 63 this October. And it's really on guys like Jeff Kern and myself and others in the association to keep his legacy alive. And then I look at my students and Jeff's students like Joey Deal and Kyle and some of his other guys and Kyle Perkins. And man, they're killers. And my students, a lot of them are going to be killers too. And it's just great to know. And so, like I said, I'm not bullshitting you and it's not a bloviating way of saying it, but man, in 10 years, when you're showing me jiu-jitsu, I'll be there with notes.
Awesome, brother.
It's all about, yeah.
Yeah.
Aren't you, David, aren't you going to be in Ohio soon?
Well, it was supposed to be the 22nd of this month at Bill Jones Academy, Top Level Martial Arts. I should be doing commentary on his thing. I still have to figure out some logistics.
Gotcha.
I think it's like 90% sure, but I've got to talk to Bill about that.
Gotcha.
I'm not competing. It would just be literally the commentary.
Gotcha.
Oh, nice.
I'm pretty
awesome.
sure. Yeah, pretty sure Emil Fisher is going to heel hook everybody in that division and then
Probably will
go home early.
Yeah, more than likely.
Yeah.
Sweet. Very cool.
That dude's big fun. I trained with him for like 2 solid hours the last time I went to Bill's. And I'm glad that the old man still got it because, you know, Emil is hungry. He's bigger than me. He's got the technique, you know.
And he will come after it too. He's coming after.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, like he definitely sees the invisible podium when he's there, you know, and that's good because I'm not against hard training. And I knew what I was getting into rolling with him because I've rolled with him in the past and it was just fun times, you know.
Yeah.
He heel hooked me, I think like 8 or 9 times. I caught him in a knee bar and he was like, oh, that's cute. Haven't been caught in a knee bar in a while. I'm like, check my DVD, you know? Like,
right. Cool. Well, thanks for hanging with us, man. Go ahead, Chad.
I was going to say before you go, don't forget about our boy John and Lanky.
Oh yeah, John Robinson, Lanky Fight Gear, Roll
Among Us.
RollAmongUs.com. And you know, I was in Seattle last week and I was telling a longer limbed lady that if the gi doesn't fit her, she can get an L size through Lanky Fight Gear. And she goes, oh, what's the site for that? And I go, RollAmongUs.com. She kind of like did the Pitbull head tilt. Like, I don't get that. And I had to explain, you know, oh, it's a reference to the Misfits, but you're probably too young for that. And then she got offended that I said she was probably too young. So, you know, certain parts of the world, you got to be careful what you say.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, John's a great dude. Obviously, he takes care of East Coast. He takes care of a lot of us. Just a hidden gem and a national treasure within the jiu-jitsu community. That John Robinson, he's good people.
Yeah, he is for
sure.
Yeah,
He doesn't want much in return. You know, just a little bit of loyalty and goes a long way.
Yep.
Yeah. Actually, the reason I got the Merkatsu artwork, he's the one who contacted Seymour Yang and made that happen 6 years ago.
Wow,
awesome.
That's so cool.
My iconography is all thanks to John Robinson. Yeah.
Very cool.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, Jack.
Awesome, brother. All right.
Great.
Hi, dude.
Hey, you too, man. Take it easy. We'll see you. All right.
Much appreciated.